the Washington Day address. Obviously the father of our country, a man that visited the State House numerous times. And to present the Washington address this year is our friend from Montgomery County, the Honorable Craig Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the General Assembly. I'd like to give special thanks to my wife, Tia, my daughters, Anaya and Kaylin, and my mother, Vivian, and Father Leon for being here to support me this evening. If you'll please stand. Ladies and gentlemen, we meet this evening to celebrate the birth of one of our great leaders, not only to reflect upon his life, but also to renew our sense of patriotism and reflect upon the progress of our great nation through the leaders that followed him. But this is not, nor should it be, an easy task. First, we are often prone to think that just by merely reciting the great deeds of a leader, that it will somehow magically energize and motivate us. And we rest on the notion that our future is secure because the past progress has been so great. Second, we think that by inheritance, the quality of these great leaders will somehow filter to us, because we may share commonalities in descent or interests. As for the latter, the simple fact of territorial origin or religious affiliation or political party is unworthy to be the symbol of unity in a cosmopolitan nation as great as ours. And our devotion to our nation must be committed enough to obliterate racial, religious, or gender distinction. Simply, we must focus on the things that unite us and less on the lines that divide us. Only then do we begin to touch the spirit of our great leaders and reflect on their great deeds. So, what characterizes a great leader who has made their mark on history? Well, I think it's simple. They are a person who has looked through the confusion of the moment and has seen the moral issue involved. They are a person who has refused to have their sense of justice distorted by special interests. They've listened to their conscience until their conscience becomes a trumpet call to like-minded individuals so they can all come together with a common goal and make a new period in history, hence progress. And so we begin tonight with our nation's first president, George Washington, who resigned his post in this very building, and think, what do we admire most about him, and how did he contribute to our nation's progress? Now, much has been said about the history of our first president. We've all heard the stories, many unsubstantiated but nonetheless entertaining, about his strength and moral character by admitting he chopped down a cherry tree, or his physical prowess in throwing a silver dollar across the Potomac River. But one thing is uniformly conceded by all, and that is George Washington, unfortunately, didn't have the ability to blame the current problems of his nation on a previous administration's failed policies. Now, it's tough being the first of anything, and it was Washington's experiences as a young man that made it seem unlikely that he would ever live long enough to achieve that first. Many of you know he suffered from malaria and smallpox, pleurisy and dysentery all before he was 30. But it was destined that George Washington was to be our first president. And the thing I think we most admire is the spirit of the soldier in George Washington. And the progress gleaned from him is to have found a similar spirit in the civil life of the people, the same pride in the protection of our nation, the spirit of courage, and the spirit of self-surrender. For a soldier embraces the notion of losing one's own life for the life of a larger cause. They hold personal suffering of no account. They fling down in the heat of battle their all and say, I will stand or fall with this cause. Now, while we hold deference for the soldier in George Washington, we can't forget about the statesman who believe the unity of government is a main pillar in the edifice of your real independence, of your tranquility at home, your peace abroad, of your safety, of your prosperity, of that very liberty which you so highly prize. I think this is very important. The unity of government is a main pillar of the very liberty with which you so highly prize. And keep in mind that when George Washington was helping to craft the Constitution, there was a belief that unity, including accepting that all men were created equal. According to him, equality meant equal opportunity, and believed if we lost opportunity, so went the chance for our nation to truly promote equality. Even before President Lincoln had undertaken the task of addressing equality and slavery, Washington had been very clear about his position. He neither bought nor sold slaves himself, and he had a problem with the idea of holding slaves. In fact, so much that he freed the slaves that were on his property in his will. It was his last contribution to the betterment of our nation. George Washington believed that anything that would provide for the betterment of our country was the best form of patriotism. And so when we look at his life and achievements, his greatest contribution to our nation's progress was the birth and prosperity of patriotism. And as we travel down the storied path of our progress of our nation, we heard last week about Abraham Lincoln, who guided this country through one of the most devastating experiences in its history, the Civil War. He is considered by many historians to have been the greatest American president. But to accomplish that, Lincoln had to build upon the accomplishments of former presidents like George Washington. As a commander-in-chief, Lincoln was noted for vigorous measures, sometimes at odds with the very Constitution Washington helped craft. The Constitution had come to protect slavery and peace, but in war, Lincoln came to believe the commander-in-chief could abolish slavery as a military necessity. In fact, it's interesting that the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation even bore this military justification, as did all of Lincoln's racial measures, including his decision in the final proclamation to accept blacks in the Army. So Lincoln's achievements, saving the Union that George Washington had felt so strongly needed to be protected, and freeing the slaves, which Washington had believed was the right thing to do, assured Lincoln his place in history, and more importantly, the continuation of Washington's prescribed patriotism of a nation through tolerance. Now, fast forwarding to today, President Barack Obama, like President Lincoln and Washington, is a man whose fate it has been to arrive at the presidency in a period of wartime crisis and economic tumultuousness. The day before his inauguration, President Obama retraced Abraham Lincoln's journey by train from Philadelphia to Washington, with adulatory crowds lining the tracks the entire length of his trip. And while many detractors have said that President Obama hasn't yet done anything for our nation, I assert that with his election alone, he brought our nation into a new place. For not only is a black man our commander-in-chief, but the election also showed many that a woman who was very close to receiving the Democratic nomination for president was a possible reality. President Obama has given us hope, and not just in the sense of desire that one day our nation will be in a better place, but to the contrary, that we are in a better place. We again have a point in our country's history, much like Washington and Lincoln, that we can point to and say, progress has been made, and it's quantifiable. Now, interestingly, in Obama's inauguration address, he evoked the words, not of Lincoln, not of who he shared so many similarities with, but of George Washington. I quote, "At the moment when the outcome of our revolution was most in doubt, the father of our nation ordered these words to be read to the people. Let it be told to the future world that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, that the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet it." Ladies and gentlemen, I believe our depth of winter is our current economic situation and our conflict in the Middle East. But as long as we have come forth to meet them, as our current president might say, with an audacity of hope, and as President Lincoln said, by appealing to the better angels of our nature, for our first president, George Washington, said, there is a destiny which has control of our actions. And I hope that that destiny is the continued progress of our nation. So tonight, as we celebrate George Washington's birthday, let us remember that if it were not for the father of our nation, the first to preach that hope would get us through the tough times, our progress might not find us where we are. And it is imperative that we continue to meet the needs of patriotism and progress to build a better nation. Thank you all. God bless Maryland, and God bless the United States of America.